Hello everyone. This video is for April 3rd or 4th. And since I have been a little behind on these videos, I will talk about what we did this day. And since we started the Biome Project last week, I'll also go over the project just a little bit and our day one stuff, along with everything that you should do for today's part of the project. So today we are going to start with some ecology notes. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about abiotic versus biotic factors. What are those? The levels of organization that we see in ecology, the difference between habitat and niche, and the different types of feeders that we find in our ecosystems. After I go over some of those notes, like I said, we're going to continue working on this biome project. So the day 2 slide that we'll work on today are the map of the biome and biotic factors. As a reminder, last week when we started, we also did iLearn on that day, so I didn't give you too much, but I introduced the assignment, the project that we'll do over the course of the unit. I assigned you your biome at random, and if you weren't there or forgotten, I'll show you where you can find what biome you were assigned. And then we just did one slide on our title slide and then a slide on abiotic factors, and that was pretty much it. So that's what we'll do in this video. So it might be longer than normal, but of course you can fast forward to the parts that you need to go to. All right, so as a refresher, ecology is the unit that we're working on. Ecology is the study of how organisms interact with their surrounding environment. So it's a science of relationships. How do organisms interact with other organisms? How do animals interact with other animals? How do plants interact with other plants? How do animals interact with plants? And of course, how do all of those interact with non-living parts of their environment? So that's all things that we'll cover in the next few weeks. So what do we mean by environment? So any environment that you are in is made up of two factors. They're going to be made up of biotic factors, which are all living things that are inhabiting the earth. And you're going to also have abiotic factors. And these parts are the non-living parts of the environment. So things like temperature, soil, light, moisture, and air current, and even more things. Those are just a few examples. One easy way that I like to break these words down, one easy way that I like to remember these words is by breaking them down. So remember that bio means living. So in the study of biology, we are learning and studying about living things. Anytime you add an A or an an as a prefix, it kind of negates whatever word you're saying, or it just makes it mean without or not something. So for example, bio means living. So biotic factors are living things like mushrooms, other kinds of fungi, butterflies, other kinds of animals, and all kinds of plants like beautiful trees. When you add that A and make it abiotic, it makes it not living. So these are non-living parts of our environment. So like I said before, soil, temperature, air current, things like water and sunlight can be those as well. So the next part we're going to talk about is the levels of organization. So we're going to talk about what we mean when we say organism, what we mean when we say population, what we mean when we say community, ecosystem, and biosphere, because those might be words that we use pretty often. So it's important to know what we mean when we use them. So starting with the very lowest level of organization is organism. An organism is any unicellular or multicellular form that has all the characteristics of life. It is one individual being, living thing. For example, yourself, your individual self is an organism. One sloth, like the picture, is an organism. Miss Menendez, on her own is an organism. And this is the lowest level of organization. This is the most specific that we can get. When we move up from that, we have population. A population is a group of organisms of just one specific species that live in the same place at the same time that can interbreed. So those are a lot of parts. But essentially, if we're looking at the sloth example from the previous slide, a population would just be more than one sloth that live in the same place at the same time, like the pictures. Organisms that are of the same species that live in the same place at the same time can more likely than not reproduce, can interbreed. Organisms of the same species can reproduce with each other. Organisms of different species cannot, therefore will not be a population if they're different species. Organisms that are part of the same population will be able to produce fertile offspring, meaning that they'll be able to make babies, and those babies will be able to make babies. And those organisms will also compete with each other for resources because they have to have food, mates, shelter, etc. And it's their survival of the fittest, right? So those that get those resources survive. And if others are getting in your way, you have to make sure that you win in the end. Going up from population, we have a community. So community is several populations that are inhabiting the same environment, a common environment, and are interdependent. They kind of do their own thing, but they interact with each other and depend on each other for certain things. Multiple organisms make a population, multiple populations make a community. Here we're still talking about living things. So in this picture, the sloth is part of this community, but so is the toucan, so is the macaw, so is the boa constrictor and the tree snail and the butterfly and the frog and the beetle. All of those different populations come together to form a community. When you get to the ecosystem level, this is when we start seeing the community. So all the populations that you see in your community, the sloth and the toucan and the butterfly. And you see abiotic factors that they interact with. So not only do you see all the different kinds of animals and plants, you also start seeing things that are non-living, like the water in the river, the rocks, the soil, the sunlight that comes through the trees, the airflow. All of those things are part of an ecosystem. They're essential for these living things to continue to live. Then lastly, the highest level of organization is the biosphere. So the biosphere is pretty much planet Earth. We say that it's the life-supporting portions. So places where things are able to live. Places that are composed of air, land, fresh water, and salt water. Pretty much most of the planet. And this is the highest level of organization. It's kind of like the most broad that we can get. So we start with organism, and multiple organisms create a population. Multiple populations create a community, so different populations of species. Then different communities, along with the abiotic factors, create an ecosystem, and then multiple ecosystems come together to form the biosphere. And that's how life is organized. Alrighty, next up is the difference between habitat and niche. These words are sometimes used interchangeably, but they do mean different things. So a niche is a role that the species plays in their community. It's its total way of life. We'll talk about that, what that means in a second. It's kind of like, do they produce the energy? Do they eat other organisms? Are they the predator? Are they the prey? What is their specific role in their community? A habitat is just the place in which an organism lives out its life. So kind of like the ecosystem, it's just where they are. So the niche is what their role is, and it's what their role is in their community. And the habitat is where they live. A niche, so the role of that certain organism is determined by the tolerance limitations of an organism. or limiting factors. So we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago when we did the oh dear activity. Limiting factors are any biotic or abiotic factor that restricts the existence of organisms in a specific environment. So in a specific place, there are only so many resources available. And because there's only so many resources available, populations can't blow up out of control. There can't be like 1 trillion deer in a small forest because there's not enough food, there's not enough shelter. And those are examples of limiting factors, which I think are on the next page as well. Limiting factors are amount of food, water, the temperature, the amount of space, and the availability of mates. All of those things are limited or they change and vary. And if organisms are able to get these resources and survive these temperatures and mate, they are successful. But not everyone will be able to do that because it's only so much available. Lastly, we're going to talk about different feeding or feeders with this specific feeding relationship. So there are 3 main types of feeding relationships that we'll talk about. There's the producer and consumer, there's predator or prey, parasite and host. So a producer is an autotroph, auto meaning self, troph meaning feeding. So it's self-feeding. Plants are producers because they take the energy of the sun and they convert it into a form of energy that they can use. These guys are at the bottom of the food chain or the very first step of the food chain because this is where most of the energy is. They're the only things that could take the energy from the sun and put it into something we can all use. So these guys are super important. Next, we have consumers. Consumers are all heterotrophs. Hetero means different, troph means feeding. So they have to eat other things to get their energy because we can't just create energy like producers can. Yeah, so this picture kind of shows that pretty well. There are different types of consumers. We have herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and decomposers. I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of those are. Consumers, we have primary consumers, secondary, and tertiary. It just depends on their spot in the food chain. Primary consumers are going to be the first organisms in the food chain that eat. And since the first spot is the producer, and producers are plants, the primary consumer has to be an animal that eats plants. We call those herbivores. Herbivores are plant-eating organisms. The secondary and tertiary consumers have to eat those primary or secondary consumers. So they have to be an organism that eats meat. We call organisms that prey on animals or eat meat as carnivores. So primary consumers have to be herbivores because they're eating those delicious plants / producers. And secondary and tertiary consumers have to eat those primary consumers, which are animals, so they are carnivores. So with the consumer, we have carnivores that eat meat. Carnivores are also predators because they are hunting prey or other animals for food. The predator of the predator-prey relationship is the hunter, the one that goes after other organisms. Another kind of carnivore is a scavenger. So scavengers don't hunt living organisms. They literally feed on animals that have already died. So any decomposing organisms or freshly dead organisms, these scavengers like vultures, literally vultures, will come and pick off the meat from the bone. Another type of consumer is an omnivore. So that's what we are. We are omnivores. Omnivores just mean that we can do both. We are not an herbivore specifically or a carnivore specifically, but we do have the ability to eat both plants and animals. Now I have a lot of questions about Well, what about if a human is like vegan or vegetarian by choice? Which is fine. So those are preferences. You can prefer to not eat meat or only eat fish or not eat animal products. That's your choice. But biologically, our bodies are created where we can break down both plants and animals. We have the capability of doing it. And that's really what we're talking about here. So we can both eat plants and animals. Another consumer is a decomposer. So these guys play a really big role in the food chain. They break down dead and decaying animals into simpler molecules that can then be absorbed by either the decomposers or by other producers, and kind of give back to the earth, put those molecules back in the earth where we can use them to have producers grow and continue this awesome food chain, or this cycle of life and how things work in the ecosystem. So decomposers break down dead and dying animals into simpler parts. And that's it for the types of feeding relationships. We haven't talked about the parasite host. We'll talk about symbiotic, or not. We'll talk about relationships between organisms at a later date. But this is sufficient information for what you need to know today. So now that we're done with the notes, I want to go back to Canvas. I haven't put these notes on Canvas yet, but by the time I post the video, I'll also post the slides, so you'll be able to see that there. All right, so today is May 3rd/4th. We did start the Biome Project last week on the 27th and 28th, so I'm going to go there first just to kind of remind you all what is going on here. So here's that first assignment page for the Biome Project Day 1. As a reminder, the project is going to last our entire unit. So while I am going to give you the project rubric for the entire thing, don't freak out and think that it's overwhelming, because I will break it down day by day. We will do bit by bit, and I will help you along the way and give you time to finish it along the way. You'll be assigned a biome at random, and at this point you have been already. And then you're responsible for finding in all the information and putting it into slides, like Google Slides. So the goal is not to turn in one large presentation at the end, but you'll turn in specific slides by the end of each week, or by the end of each period, ideally. Now, if you do it on Google Slides, you'll probably start with, 1 or 2 slides and turning that in. And at the end, you might turn in the entire thing, but you're turning in bit by bit each week. So each class period will include a time where I do some notes and I kind of talk about something regarding ecology to just explain concepts. For example, what an abiotic factor is versus biotic, or what different types of feeding relationships there are. Then after that, I'm going to give you time in class to research specific things about your biome. So if you have the marine biome, where we're talking about the ocean, you're going to tell me abiotic and biotic factors of that. Or if you have a deciduous forest, or if you have a rainforest, you're going to tell me the specifics regarding your own biome. So this is what the project rubric looks like. It's very extensive. I give you a spot to put the biome if you would like. I also put some due dates, but at this point, we're already kind of off, and that's completely my fault. But I'm going to update this later, but I'll let you know when the deadlines are. And how this is set up is it tells you how many points those slides are, what number slide this content should be on, the category, so is it the title page, or are we doing abiotic factors or what, and a description of what exactly you need on that slide. And it tells you everything. So this is a good place to check to make sure that you are on the right path for your project. Do I have everything I need in my slide? This is a great place to look. And I do break it down every day and just kind of copy and paste the specific ones we're doing that day. But this is a good resource just overall if you ever need to look back at it and make sure you're on the right track. So again, this was for day 1, which happened last Tuesday and Wednesday. So on that day, we focused on getting a biome assigned to you and learning about our abiotic factors. So we assigned biomes in class. I did it completely at random. I used a random number generator. But if you were absent or did not hear or forgot, I have this spreadsheet right here that you can click on and find your biome. Keep in mind, though, if you do not see your name on this first page, there are multiple pages down here for each class period. So if you are in my G3 class, make sure to click G3 and then find your name. After you were assigned your biome, you were to learn a little bit about it. Some are familiar. You might have heard of marine or rainforests before, but some were kind of new. So maybe you weren't as familiar with coniferous forests or grasslands. So I just wanted you to kind of get familiar. Slide 1 is the title page. So every slideshow has a title page. In this one, really self-explanatory, but you just put your name, the name of your biome, 2 interesting facts. I put factors. I'm going to change that. That's supposed to be facts. So like what struck you as weird, cool, or interesting when you were learning about your biome, something that made you be like, wow, I didn't know that. And then a collage of pictures to represent your biome. So this could be 3+ pictures, and you could show off the landscape, the kinds of animals you find, the kinds of plants, really whatever floats your boat. So that's the title page. Slide 2 was about abiotic factors. So I kind of talked about abiotic factors a little earlier in my notes. But the description here is phenomenal for giving you examples of what abiotic factors to talk about. So here it says, give a brief description of the biome, introducing the main features, such as average temperature, average precipitation, climate, type of soil. Down here, I gave you some extra ones because those are just examples, but there's so many more abiotic factors that your biome could potentially have that would be interesting to put. So on top of average temperature, average precipitation, climate, type or quality of soil, you can also talk about the humidity or the elevation, the air quality. Does your biome have permafrost? Does it have silt? Things like that. And then include a definition of abiotic factors. What does that mean? And then you'll just turn in your slides here when you've completed them, those 2 slides. Because again, this day was very easy because I introduced the assignment and my in-person students had to do iLearn. So we did very minimal that day. Now for today's slide, they take a little bit more information, which is fine because we have more time today. So today is May 3rd or 4th. So you can click on Continue Biome Project here, or it is just titled Biome Project Day 2. So at the top of this page, there's just some information about last week in case you weren't here. But today we're going to be focusing on slides 3, 4, and 5, which are about biotic factors and the map of the biome. So I'm going to do slide 5 first, just because it makes more sense in my brain to continue doing abiotic things. So the map of the biome. So here's a description that is in your rubric. So where in the world is your biome located? Color or highlight the locations of your biome in the world. Also write out the major locations of your biome and graph the overall climate for a year. And here's a great resource. It doesn't have, I'll talk about it later. It's for the graphs. It doesn't have all the biomes, but it's still great for some. So my instructions here, for the first question, where in the world is your biome located? I have this picture, it's a world map, and I want you to save it to your computer, upload it to ICYMI, draw or highlight the parts of the world that we find your biome in, and then download that back and put it in your slides. So I'm going to show you how to do it. It's not as hard as it seems, just kind of takes lots of steps. So on this picture, you'll right click and you'll go to save image, and then you'll save it whatever you'd like to name it. I suggest downloading it to your desktop just because it makes it a little bit easier to find. Then you'll press save, should pop up down here. When you're in ICYMI, you'll upload from your computer. You will find your picture and open it. You have to convert it, convert it. Okay. And then you can make this smaller if you need to, which is fine. And then you can take the drawing or the markup, the highlighter option, and just draw where you find your biome. So you could do it any color you like, but yeah, just start shading in. Like, let's say my biome includes these places. It doesn't have to be great, it doesn't have to be completely filled in, doesn't have to be perfect and beautiful. Just has to be there and accurate. And then once you are done coloring in the parts of the planet that we find your biome in, remember this is your biome specifically. Sorry everyone, I'm learning that this downloads as a PDF and not a picture. So from here you can take a screenshot, or if you know how to just select a part of the screen, you can do that and save it as a picture. If you don't know how to do that, let me know and I will let you know. I'm not on my Chromebook now, so it's just going to look different because I'm on Chromebooks. But once you have that picture there, so you press the print screen button. But once you have your picture copied, you'll be able to just paste it in there, and then you can crop it if you did a screenshot. So that's all in there. Okay, so that'll be your map. So in a text box around or below your map that you colored in, I want you to write out those major locations of your biome. So are there parts in South America and Africa and Southeast Asia that you find this biome in? If you can find specific cities, that would be helpful too. So you can do countries, cities, just specific major places. The last part is to graph the overall climate for a year. You could just find a graph that's already created that has how much precipitation or how the temperature is over the course of a year. And here's that helpful site that I pointed out. So here's another link to it. This is what it looks like. So for coniferous forest, it has this map from Russia, from Canada, and from Finland. So you can pick one. If your biome is not here, you can just, like I said, find a graph of just climate over the course of a year. Make sure it shows you January through December. And in a text box next to the graph or below it, briefly describe to me what trends you see. So did you receive the same amount of precipitation all year? Did the temperature stay the same? Were there times where you had more rain or less rain? Were there times where it was cold? Were there times where it was really hot? Just let me know what you see in the graph. Kind of explain what the graph looks like in words in that part. And that's slide 5. Now, if you need to take this and kind of split it up into 2 different parts, 2 different slides, that is perfectly fine. Our numbers might be off from now on, but as long as you have all the information I tell you through this, you're good. Then slides 3 and 4 are about biotic factors. So remember from our notes that biotic factors are living things. So you'll have 2 separate slides that talk about 2 different biotic factors, but you'll have the same kinds of information on these. Slide 3 is going to be plants, those biotic factors, and slide 4 is going to be specifically about animals. So each one, you have to find 2 examples of each. And I did say here, be specific. So instead of just saying like turtles, give me a species. So like a loggerhead sea turtle. Instead of just monkeys, put macaques. Because there are different species of organisms that might live in different biomes. So you have to be specific. And then it says include details about such special adaptations to their environment, type of consumer, and interactions with other animals in their biome. The animals also talk about labeling who the carnivores and omnivores and herbivores are. So what kind of feeder are they? So tell me a little bit more about those specific organisms. What are some special adaptations that they have that help them live in their specific biome? Do they have special skin or fur or scales? Do they have certain appendages? Do they have certain behaviors that allow them to survive? There's so many things that you can look at as far as adaptations. Are they a primary consumer, an herbivore, carnivore, an omnivore, or are they more of a top predator? And that's for the animal part. What kind of other organisms do they interact with? So if they're animals, are they a predator or are they a prey? What do they eat if they're either one of them? Are they a plant that has nectar and interact with pollinators, those bees and butterflies a lot? And those are just a few examples that you can talk about. There's so many different ways that you can come at this part. And then lastly, describe the evolution of the species based on their adaptations to their environment. How has it evolved over time to survive? How did your organism change to best adapt to their environment now? So you'll put that on those 2 slides. Remember, one slide, you'll do all of that for plants. The other slide, you'll do all of that for animals. And you'll have 2 examples of both plants and 2 examples of animals. And that'll be your slides 3 and 4. And then when you're done, you can turn them in here. So as of right now, hopefully you have gotten a lot more familiar with the Biome Project, specifically what we've done on days 1 and 2. So slides 1 through 5. And we've learned a little bit about ecology, like what abiotic factors and biotic factors are, the levels of organization, the difference between a niche and a habitat, and the type of feeders and relationships, or the start of relationships that we'll talk about. If there are any questions on any of this, please do not hesitate to let me know, because like I said, this is just going to keep growing. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.